Hello and welcome to another episode of the Well Played Podcast. I'm your host, Warren Curtis. Today we're talking about how Starfield was almost the biggest game of 2023 for the PS5, how lawyers are constantly messing up, and why does Mario have such a big trunk? We also catch up on some news, discuss the games we've been playing, and talk a little bit about how the video game ratings work with our kids. But before we get into it, let's talk about what it is we do here on the show. We're here to talk about gaming from a mature adult perspective. What that means is we're not going to get into this console wars. We don't wave a fanboy flag. What we do is talk about facts about the games, the gaming industry, and we do it in simple language. We give our opinions on why these things matter. We will talk about gaming as an adult, as parents, and we will also talk about the games that we are playing. You can find more from us on YouTube. The link is in the description. And on Twitter by following Amarren Studios. That is AMARREN STUDIOS. We're also available as an audio show on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you catch your pods. Be sure to like us, rate us, ring the bell, because all that helps everyone else find the show, and we want those comments, we want your feedback, so let's hear it. With all that said, let's get into it. There's lots of news this week. This week has been heavy with lots of information coming out of the preventative injunction trial going on between the Federal Trade Commission and Microsoft ABK. We're going to talk a little bit about the trial, but we're going to talk a lot more about these tidbits of this gaming industry news that is coming out of the trial. So basically, we're going to talk a little bit about the status of the trial specifically, and we're going to go really deeper into these other cool things that we are learning that are gaming related, that have come out of the questionings and witness statements, the testimonies that have been provided thus far. There's lots of inside baseball stuff here, and it shines some great light on how the industry works, and from various perspectives as well. So don't worry, we have lots of other stuff we're going to talk about too. We're not going to just sit here and talk about the legal stuff. We're not going to sit here and just talk about the trial necessarily. There was a Nintendo Direct this week with lots of goodies, so we're definitely going to be talking about that. Final Fantasy XVI dropped this week, so there's a little bit of discussion about that as well. But from the top of it, we're going to talk a little bit about our this trial, obviously. And talking about this trial, we're not. I don't want to get into necessarily the specifics of each and everything. We might talk a little bit about some of that stuff separately. But there's all sorts of cool kind of things about how the industry works and what that means coming out of this. And this is one of it. Sony almost had Starfield locked into an exclusive agreement for the PlayStation. In giving testimony at the FTC trial, Xbox head Phil Spencer revealed that at the time Microsoft had bought ZeniMax out, one of the subsidiaries, which is Bethesda, was in negotiations with Sony very recently up until that buyout about an exclusivity deal for the upcoming Todd Howard-led game, Starfield. This would have looked a lot like Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo deals that had happened already. We saw that when Microsoft had bought Bethesda or ZeniMax, that these exclusivity deals for the PS5, they were honored, right? Those games came out on the PS5, and then 12 months later, they were allowed to release on other platforms, so we saw them on PC and Xbox then. They, of course, got put right into Game Pass, and it appears that I believe Deathloop went into PS Plus. I'm not sure about Ghostwire Tokyo. Maybe it has now, into like the extra tier or something. But either way, we saw that Microsoft honored the commitments. These were deals that were made to get get these games locked into PlayStation. So PlayStation 5 had a good launch period of games when Xbox obviously had a bit of a lackluster launch period. What happened then is when the acquisition of ZeniMax closed, the desire to develop for a single platform was discussed because of the lower costs and quicker development time associated with that. So the decision was made to make Starfield exclusive for Xbox and PC, at least at that time. During his testimony, Phil also mentioned that if a game was going to come out for PS5 at the same time as Xbox, like if Starfield was still going to be a multi-platform game, it would not be coming out this year and would be delayed further in order to make sure everything gets balanced correctly. They want parity in between the titles, so they want to make sure it performs just as good on the PS5 as it does on the Xbox and on the PC. So that's an important thing to kind of think about that. And when you're dealing with proprietary engines like the Creation Engine 2 that Bethesda uses, there's a lot of finicky stuff to get there. Whereas if you're making for the Xbox and PC architecture, you're kind of setting a standard there, and it's a little bit easier to target. We did a bit of a discussion about that last week with the frame rate locking, and this is kind of a similar kind of aspect, except for it's on a much bigger scale. This should really come as no surprise to anyone who plays exclusive games on any platform, really. Sony routinely locks third-party titles up for a minimum of a timed exclusive. We saw that this week with Final Fantasy XVI, for example. I believe it's a 12 or a 6-month deal to make sure that it doesn't show up anywhere else. And I doubt we'll ever see it on Xbox, but there is a possibility, obviously, for a PC release down the road. I believe they're talking about that. These deals come with various combinations of development support when Sony makes them. So or not just development support, really, there's financial support, marketing support, other benefits for the developer and the publisher in exchange for this exclusive deal, be it timed or permanent, whatever it works. There's also feature exclusivity or exclusive deals and other benefits. So by feature exclusive, they could lock things up on a second screen service, or even as far as like the haptic feedbacks and the adaptive trigger controls that the PS5 has. They can ensure that doesn't show up on any other platform if another platform were to come up with the technology to deliver that, right? Which obviously a PC can adapt to that. We're not going to see like the Xbox come out with adaptive resistance triggers, I don't think, on this generation, maybe on the next, because they're obviously have to work around patents. I think it's a cool technology, and it definitely changes the game when it comes to especially multiplayer games. So I think it's something worth looking on. I just want to be clear, this isn't me ragging on Sony. They conduct business as they see fit, and that's their prerogative. I'm not a fanboy on either thing. So, I find that how these deals, how they transpire and how they develop, I find all that kind of stuff interesting, and finding out more information about them, because they're usually so secretive, because there's financial information and there's development information, proprietary information associated with that. We typically don't see kind of the inner workings of that. So getting some of this stuff is super interesting to me. In somewhat related news, it was revealed during the same trial, during the testimony of the corporate vice president of game creator experience and ecosystem. I had to read that specifically. Sarah Bond, who is the corporate vice president of game creator experience and ecosystem at Xbox, that Activision threatened to withhold Call of Duty from the Xbox Series S and X, so current generation, if Microsoft wouldn't renegotiate the revenue split. The industry standard, at least as far as Xbox and Sony typically operate, is a split of 70-30, with 30% going to the platform and 70% going to the publisher. They negotiated a split of 80-20, with Activision keeping 80% of the revenue and Xbox getting 20, which I believe is where Xbox has migrated to being more where they operate more. I know on the PC, I think they went to a 95-5 for PC to operate things through the Xbox store on PC. So it's interesting to see how they're willing to take a little bit less to get a little bit more exposure. And that's obviously part of their plan. They realize they're not going to land units necessarily in people's houses consistently. And, not every house is going to have an Xbox. A lot more houses are going to have a PS5. But if they can get you into the ecosystem by playing on a streaming device or on your PC or what have you, I think they're going to do it. And that's why I think we're going to see things like an Xbox Series micro console, which is going to be basically like a streaming stick that you could just plug into your TV, hook up a controller to, and just play the games over streaming. The technology's there. The infrastructure isn't quite yet. Like, obviously, that's all dependent on where you are. If you're in a big city that has modern fiber optic systems, and you can get 1.5, 2 gigabytes a second at minimum of download speed, then and upload. You need both for cloud gaming to work effectively. It's a viable option, but for most of us, we don't have access to that. at least not reliable access to it, where you have those consistent speeds. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a shift there. We're going to talk a little bit more about cloud gaming a little bit later in this episode, and obviously a lot more in the future as the industry evolves. So it'll be interesting to see how this matures. What is pretty cool about this whole thing with these revenue splits is there's parallels we can draw from this that we learned during the Epic versus Apple trial that happened during the COVID period, I believe. It was the Epic versus Apple antitrust trial that Epic brought forth. It was pretty much entirely about how revenue is split and how Apple operates their store. And we learned that Apple and nearly every other marketplace around seem to operate on that 70-30 split. We also learned how Sony operates specifically in relation to Fortnite, which is one of the biggest games in the world, if not the biggest game in the world. We learned that Sony siphons money from Epic via the in-game currency. And how that works is, so if you're loading V-Bucks, so you go to the PlayStation Store and you go, hey, I want to buy V-Bucks, they're taking a cut of whatever that is, whatever amount you load up. So if you load up $10, they're taking their cut. So they're going to take, their 30%. They're 30%, and 70% goes on to the game or the developer. So it goes to Epic. But then when you spend the money, they're getting the cut as well. So if you can go get your phone and, you're playing Fortnite on your phone now, and you load a bunch of money up on it, Apple's getting their cut. But then you switch over to your PlayStation, your accounts are linked because crossplay. And you can go and play, or cross progression, I guess is the correct term for that. But you go to your PlayStation, boot up Fortnite, and you're in your same account, and you're like, oh, hey, they got that Ariana Grande skin on sale, so I'm going to go buy it. And you pay the money for that. They're getting a cut of that again. So they're double dipping on that, and they're the only ones apparently getting that deal. So it's kind of interesting to see how that works. The parallel I'm drawing, though, and the point I'm making is revenue splits are both a negotiation and kind of a sticking point for these deals. Obviously, from a marketplace standpoint, as an operator, as the Xbox Store, the PlayStation Store, the Apple Store, or what have you, 30% is better than 20, but 20 is still better than 0. So the degree of how things get negotiated and handled can create kind of these interesting things. Maybe they take that 80-20 split and they're okay with that, but maybe there's another thing that kind of gives them a kickback in order to compensate for that, or they take an 80-20 split off the game, and then in-game stuff, they maybe they get the 70-30 off of that, or vice versa, right? There's some things that I kind of want to know about this. Does an 80-20 split game gets the same amount of exposure on their storefront? You know how they have like the featured sections and stuff than what like a 70-30 split game would get? Or do they expose it more because they need to drive the client to spend to make up for that lost revenue? Or do they drive it less because they're taking less of a cut and they have less invested in it? Like, these are all kind of interesting aspects that I would like to find the answers to and explore and talk about later. So as I find more of this stuff, maybe I'm going to do like a special show. It won't be on the main one to keep the show more tidy. But I kind of like how game business works and things like that. So for those that aren't as vested as in the business side as I am, I'm going to try to keep the main show void of that, and maybe just do kind of special talks about this other stuff as I learn it more. And obviously I'm going to talk more about this on Twitter and on socials, and kind of put that stuff out there as well, and those aspects. Moving on, we also got a round of confirmations, and or kind of some confirmations in a roundabout way anyways, and other kind of tidbits out of this trial. Machine Games Indiana Jones game. They're the makers of like Wolfenstein. They're making Indiana Jones. Todd Howard is executive producing it. It's exclusive to Xbox now. That I don't think has ever been really confirmed before. It's also going to be day one of Game Pass, as we have grown to expect of first-party titles. The title was originally going to be multi-platform, as that deal was negotiated with Lucasfilm and Disney prior to the acquisition going through. But when the acquisition went through, Bethesda went to Lucasfilm, Disney, and all that, and they renegotiated. And I think the renegotiation selling point on that was, like, look at the quality of Spider-Man. You know, that's an exclusive game, and they're able to do that quality of work because they're only developing for a single platform. So why don't we work on that this way and turn Indiana Jones into that? Sony already has Uncharted. If they want to do anything with that, they have that IP there. So Indiana Jones is like Uncharted is Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider is Indiana Jones. It's all Indiana Jones. So let's see how that works. And I'm kind of excited to see how a studio like Machine Games, which is Quake and very Quake based. They started off as modders in the Quake community, and then they wound up starting making their own stuff, and then they got acquired because they're so good at doing what they were doing and working with the id Tech engine, that they're making the Wolfenstein series, and those games hit. Those things were really good, and to see them coming in here and doing Indiana Jones, I'm really kind of interested to see how a studio approaches a game like an Indiana Jones game from a first-person shooter perspective, because we've seen, and I'm not saying it's going to be an FPS. I doubt it'll be an FPS. Usually when you have a character-driven game, you want third-person. Like, everybody wants to see Indiana Jones's hat, the whip hanging off his belt, his leather jacket, that whole thing. So I don't entirely see this being a first-person shooter. It could be because that's the pedigree we're dealing with the studio. But to see somebody coming from a game with that kind of engineering experience and level design experience and things like that, and coming into it at that angle is interesting, because when you have the Uncharted series, those are platformer games, essentially, right? And you can see that. You can see a lot of the parallels from Uncharted to Crash Bandicoot. And there's that pedigree there, right? So I think it'll be interesting to see how that contrasts and how that plays out. On the other hand of this deal, or of this kind of conversation about exclusiveness, Matt Booty was testifying. He's the guy in charge of Xbox Game Studios. And he testified that the Outer Worlds 2 decision on whether it's going to be exclusive or not, that decision has not been made yet. In all fairness, I think that decision is a 98% chance it's going to be on Xbox. I don't think it's going to show up on PS5. I don't think it's going to show up on a PlayStation platform. But because the original game was multi-platform, like the original game was being made, it was almost going to be released when Microsoft bought Obsidian. It was being published by Private Division. That's Take-Two's indie label. There may be some reason for it to appear on the PS5, and it could very well be legal reasons. First off, Private Division may have a right of first refusal on distribution for the PlayStation 5 for that. There's quite often deals in that, like, oh, if this becomes a series, we want right of first refusal to continue publishing it. We see Borderlands is a prime example of that. Borderlands was originally released. It's made by Gearbox Software, and it was originally published by Take-Two Interactive, or 2K. I think it was under the 2K label, which is still part of Take-Two. And then, not Bethesda, Gearbox has founded a publishing arm, and they started publishing other companies' games, and so on and so forth. But then these Borderlands games continue to be published by 2K. Embracer now owns Gearbox, and Embracer being massive, they have publishing divisions. They have all sorts of stuff going all over the place. 2K is still publishing the Borderlands series games, including like Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and stuff like that. So you see there's a deal in place with that. 2K being the same parent company, chances are that's kind of a boilerplate thing that they put into their stuff. So be interesting to see if Private Division is publishing Outer Worlds 2 for other platforms, and then Xbox Game Studios publishes it for the Xbox. The second kind of hang up I have on that possibly being the case is that they may not desire to split up the user bases. It is a smaller scale game, and that game may need to land on multi-platforms to be fiscally viable. And then third, and this one's pretty thin, but it's anemic. But anyways, Phil Spencer said that numerous times they want users of games to be able to continue to play those games where they exist. They bought Minecraft. Those games are still being supported on other platforms. New versions or new releases in the series are being supported on other platforms and with full parity. I think that discussion was more in reference to games like the live service games from ZeniMax when the acquisition was happening, like Elder Scrolls Online and Fallout 76. But and they've continued to expand to Switch and PlayStation support for Minecraft, right? So there is a chance, right? I don't really know, and I don't think they even know at this point in time. It could be something that's going to develop, but good money's on it being an exclusive. I've seen some comments online about this game being too far along in the development as well to support another platform, if that isn't the plan yet. And to a degree, that makes sense. Like, they announced it a couple years ago, but it was a very quick CG trailer. The studio's making Avowed. They're supporting Grounded. They just released Pentiment, right? They are a busy studio. And I think they have multiple teams, and the way they're structured is probably a unique experience. But one aspect of that doesn't quite add up is Outer Worlds was made in Unreal Engine 4. Avowed, which I just talked about, is made in Unreal Engine 5. And what that means, and a lot of people throw game engines around like they know what they're talking about. A game engine is a factory, right? It's only as good as the product you're making in it, and it's only as good as the people that are operating it. But there's kind of cool development tools within Unreal that help with this. Games are really easily scalable in the Unreal Engine. In Unreal, you could set up predetermined hardware profiles. It even comes with some baked in. So as you're developing in one hardware profile, so you're targeting, this CPU, this graphics card, this much RAM, this hard drive space. You're targeting this kind of target. You on one platform, it can be developing the game for another platform as well at the same time. So as you're doing it, it's not completely autonomous, but it does things like button mapping and things like that, kind of all on its own. And then debugging and memory operation and all that stuff still have to go a bit the long way, but there is ways to scale the output fairly easily in Unreal, and much easier than what it has traditionally been in other engines. And of course, I'm talking about kind of publicly available engines, or at least commercially available engines, not engines that are proprietary to a developer like Creation or the tech is pretty scalable, as we've seen. But proprietary engines definitely was the Crytek engine. That was a very scalable engine, but again, it was being marketed. The Crisis series was basically a market for, hey, this is what we could do with this engine. Come buy it. So, and we got burnout as a result of that. So that was good. So being able to ship to multiple platforms because of Unreal is a possibility. Your amount of resources you need to dedicate to that makes it a little easier. It's also possible more possible because the PS5 and the Xbox Series X are much closer together in specifications than in performance terms than their predecessors really were. So it makes it easier to build some things to the same scale. So you can kind of target, what you do is you target the lowest common denominator. And some people are going to be like, well, that's the Series X, or that's the Series S, or that's the PS5. But kind of in each term, I think you got to exclude the Series S and just have a lower profile for it. You go, okay, well, the PS5 has this much more of this than the Xbox, but the Xbox has this much more of this than the PS5. So you're kind of targeting whatever the lower one is to that, and then you ship it to both platforms. And it's probably much easier to do it that way than purpose building to each one. I'm not really holding my breath that this is going to happen, but I don't have a horse in the race. Like, I'm going to probably play it on my Xbox, being as I have Game Pass, and that's where it's going to show up. But I do love it when people on every platform can experience a game. I think there needs to be, there's a world where exclusives make sense. And there's kind of a time and place for that. But I also think that more games need to reach more people as well. And I think Xbox is smart enough to realize that some things need to be exclusive. Your Halos, I think your Bethesda experiences need to be exclusive for sure. And then other things can be a little bit more open and appear in different areas. And that'd be interesting. Like, personally, I think Hi-Fi Rush would be an amazing game on the Switch. I think it's a perfect Switch game, right? Now, whether it ever shows up there, I don't know. But I think it's a perfect Switch game. So, there's a business case for it being possible. It's logistically possible. Maybe it happens, right? But they got to have that discussion. Related to that, again, Phil Spencer said during his testimony that Elder Scrolls 6 is 5+ years out, and it hasn't been decided yet whether it's exclusive. I imagine that discussion, which will be between, Phil Spencer, Sarah Bond, Matt Booty, and Todd Howard, and other individuals that have a kind of a stake in this. Pete Hines obviously would be involved in that discussion as well. I think they're going to have that discussion probably once Starfield is out in the wild and development on Elder Scrolls 6 can really begin in earnest. And then there's kind of two things to expand upon here. I said development of Elder Scrolls 6 begins in earnest. It's been underway for some time. I don't think we need to worry about that at all. They've been hiring environment artists and things like that. They're hiring Fallout people right now. So, right, they just hired, yesterday, they just hired another member of the Fallout London team. So I think that's a good sign that they are ramping up production all across their entire studio and kind of explore it that way. But the way game development works, and when you're talking about Elder Scrolls and Starfield specifically, these are Todd Howard games. I hope the next Fallout is a Todd Howard game, but logistically, I don't know if it's possible. He's also executive producing this Indiana Jones thing, as I was talking about. He's a busy guy. He's also not getting any younger, and I think by the time Fallout 5 rolls around, he might be on the retirement side of things. So I think it might be time for him to go find a beach somewhere and just, right? But maybe one last kick at the can with a mentor under his belt, if he doesn't already have a mentor, like a apprenticeship program. The apprentice becomes the master, right? So I think there might be an understudy he has. If not, I think that's something that they're going to be exploring soon. But anyways, we're talking 5 years out for Elder Scrolls. So that game's been in development for a few years. Like, you got to look at how they had to rebuild the creation engine to make the creation engine 2 for Starfield. And when they were doing that, that they were also going, okay, so you're doing this for Starfield. We're going to take this stuff and kind of do some tweaks over here for it for how Elder Scrolls is going to work, right? We have these ideas, we have these things. And there's lots to do in those type of games as well. So they need to kind of make sure those systems are going to work, right? And be balanced and things like that. So, when you're talking about game design, you have questing, world building, asset creation, lighting, audio design, all these things, just like any game. But with a Todd Howard game, it's on this massive scale. As Pete Hines said in his testimony, irresponsibly massive is what he called Starfield. And that's because Todd Howard, got the keys to the mansion and was able to go around and start doing things. So it's once a team is done on something, it's not like they're like, okay, we're done here, we're going to move over here. The team's done in Starfield, they're going to move on to Elder Scrolls, and then they're going to bounce in between the two for a while. And that's probably been happening for quite a while. They're going to go, okay, well, we're going to do this. Well, you guys do that. Oh, that's broken. We're going to come back here and fix that. And then when, Starfield's out in the open, they're going to have a team, or out in the wild rather, they're going to have a dedicated kind of team that are creating content and DLC and kind of updating the world and working on debugging and fixes that they need to get done to ship or to patch post shipping. And those artists may have to be involved in that. Those engineers may have to be involved in that, things like that. So they'll be bouncing back and forth. But then while they're doing Elder Scrolls, right, there's going to be holes in things where things are getting done on another aspect, but they can't really do what they're doing or what they need to do. So they'll be like, okay, we're going to do this Fallout 5 stuff and, type away and fix that. And then, oh, you need us back over here. This is our priority. But, when we have that break in being able to produce on this game, we're going to produce on this game. And that keeps on cycling through forever. That never stops. And unlike what a lot of people are going to tell you on the internet, this isn't like someone just builds an engine and another person draws the art and another person makes characters and someone writes the story and the music and the dialogue and all that stuff. And they just keep stacking all of it on top of each other until the game is done. It doesn't work like that at all. What most processes like this look like are And they all have nuances. Like every studio is going to operate a little differently, but they're all working kind of in unison, making their respective parts of the game. And then one of the writers says they need a tutorial component for this thing because, they don't want to put a big box on the screen saying, this is how you operate this thing. It'll break immersion. So engineering works on a mechanic that makes that, right? So they're going to be like, okay, here's a game mechanic that we can utilize to do that. And then the quest team makes a quest thing to make that happen. And then the writers do their magic and work it in to the narrative. The audio people do their thing, and then dialogue all ties it together. The art folks are making their assets and models and scenes and all that stuff for all this thing to happen. Then a level designer says, hey, what, the bad guy in this thing is clipping the light in the area of this game that he appears in or something. And then the lighting people are like, okay, well, we're going to try to work a way around this and give us proper lighting. And it gets a little bit better. But then the engineering team sees, all this lighting patching and the way they're adjusting it is just making the game stutter and the frame rate's dropping and, they're getting blue screened or whatever. So what they decide to do is they go, okay, you know what, we're going to scratch this bad guy because obviously he's, maybe too many triangles or something like that, too big. So we're going to scratch him from this level. We're going to put him in another level that has a little less going on. And we're going to put this other guy in here. And now the writers need to make all the changes for that narrative to fit. And the art people need to change what's going on so it matches and the vibe's different or whatever. And then the sound people need to rework everything. And the quest team needs to swap everything around. And they're like, okay, cool, it's fixed. And then someone in quality assurance is going to be like, hey, there's a bug that, we noticed during this random side quest here. And all of a sudden, all these potatoes just fly up in the air and rain down as hail, potato hail. And it's causing damage to the player and killing the frame rate and blue screening and all that fun stuff. And it turns out this happens when a player interacts with a quest item or something, and they can't figure out why it's doing that. And so the game is supposed to ship in 2 weeks. We got this bug. It's really weird. So they get the quest team just to shut off the side quest. It's not important right now. Stop that item from spawning, and they're just going to move on in the Q&A process, right? It's just a small little side quest. It's just a funsy thing. We're going to get rid of it for the time being, and we'll circle back to it. And so they don't delete anything because they might get it fixed, right? But then the game ships because they didn't figure it out in time, and there's all this leftover code in there, and then some modder goes in and goes, hey, there's all this stuff for this quest and things like that. And then they realize that the whole problem is associated because, this quest item started off life as a grav hammer and it adjusted the gravity in the environment and it was bugged. So, this stuff happens all the time. And then, 20 minutes before this game needs to be shipped to the guy that puts it on the Blu-ray, they finally got it debugged and working, so they just ship it and they start working on a day one patch, right? At no point in time, that 20 minutes in between them going, it's done, and the game getting sent to the guy that prints it is like the only time that game looks like the way it's going to, during development, that's going to look like the way you and I play it. It's going to feel like the way you and I are playing it. It's going to sound like the way you and I are playing it. Nowhere in there before that is it really going to be like that. There's times, we saw it during the GTA 6 leaks, that games look incredibly rough during development. And people were like, oh, GTA 6 looks like garbage. Well, yeah, because it's nowhere near coming out yet. But people are like, well, it should look better than that. No, it shouldn't. They could be working on a section for world building. So, they're populating the map and doing all this stuff, and the lighting team's doing their thing, and everybody's kind of doing everything all at once. The music is not done, the audio isn't done, the art isn't done, but they need to make the world, right? So they can start populating things into it. So they're like, hey, we got the grass textures ready. The grass textures are good, so let's pop in the grass. And they're like, okay, so we're going to start popping in trees. So maybe they take trees from the last game, and it was like, a PS3 game, right? And in the case of GTA, it's kind of like that. They're taking assets from a PS3 game and putting it into a PS5 game, right? And they took these trees, and this is all hyperbole. I'm just kind of talking hypotheticals. I don't know for sure if this is exactly what happened with GTA 6, but I'm saying this as an example. They took the trees from GTA 5 and they put them in there. And these are all low poly, dumbed down versions of trees, but it's what they have. And they're like, this is tree number 1. And then this is tree number 2. And this is tree number 3. And all the different designs of trees, they have assigned names. And they keep going about that. They do the same thing with the rocks and the cars and the people and the buildings and all that stuff. And then what happens is the artist's like, I just finished tree number 1. And he uploads it. And now tree number 1 is replaced by this asset in the game. So all tree number 1s look good and tree number 2 still look like garbage. And then the next artist is like, I finished tree number 2. So they upload that. And that just keeps on going and going and going until the world looks the way it's supposed to. But at this time, you also have, like, the characters could be in the game and they're just sliding around, like skating. They're just like that. They're not walking, right? And, that's because nobody's done the mocap yet, right? So they're just like, okay, we're just going to throw this thing in there and these guys are going to skate around. We need to work on the logic of these people. We're not worried about the animation. That'll come later. But the logic of how they work. It's a big immersive world. They need to figure that out, right? So they pop all that in there. They could just even be wireframe. They might not even have animation or textures yet or anything. And then now you get like, let's say the mocap studio does all their stuff, right? And they have it all animated and fine tuned and it looks good. So then they pop that onto the character, and then you see the character go and grab the mug or something, and he's 3 feet away from it, and it's bugged, but the animations are smooth and clean and they look proper. So then somebody's got to come in and tweak it so it looks right. And all this stuff is happening simultaneously. And I know I'm kind of rambling on a rant here, but all this is happening simultaneously, and then QA is doing their thing. And finally at the end of it, they get that polish and it looks good and they ship. And it's a hard target to do. It's very complicated. The bigger the game, obviously, it makes it more complicated as well. And the more things you can touch and feel and interact with in a game makes it much more complicated because everything could be wrong. A good story is the Skyrim bee story. From the opening of Skyrim was completely bugged because there was a bee that was in the world and it affected the gravity of the game. And they weren't sure what was happening. And then somebody was like, wait, there's a bee. And they figured it out. And it was just one of those things. Even gameplay trailers and stuff that we see at E3 or whatever, they're not really representative of what the product actually looks like at that point in time. The game's obviously going to probably look like that. But what happens is they focus on that slice of the game that they're working on for the trailer. And they make that spit polished, shiny, cool, and focus all their efforts on that so the trailer can be made, and then they work on the other stuff. So, it's a little bit different, and they handpick those things and tweak those things just for us to see. But really what's happening behind the scenes is a lot different. Even games with demos are like that, right? They'll focus on a demo. If the demo is like far out from the release, they focus on that section of the game for the demo. And then they have that ready and then they ship that. But that section of the demo might not have all the other goodies in the code that they need. They just make that slice, that one bit. More often than not, though, demos are coming out after the game has been completed, right? So it's off to, we call it going gold, right? So it's going to get published in the next couple weeks. It's going to be put onto a disc, and that disc production is happening. So the whole team's now working on debugging in the day one patch. And that's when the game is content complete and arriving in stores soon. So that demo is really just kind of a slice of actually the final product. And that's more often what you see is for demos. But demos that are far further away, a lot of companies just call them betas now. This is a beta. This is not representative of jack shit, right? Anyways, that was a side quest from the main topic, but it was kind of worth discussing, I think, on the context of how games are made to understand why it's going to take so long to get to Elder Scrolls 6. And I just want to make clear that Elder Scrolls 6 has been in development for a fair bit. Obviously, as more people come off of Starfield, more people are going to be going into that. And that isn't a, on this day this happens. It is a gradual thing as teams free up resources and can move on to other projects. The other side of that whole ES6 discussion was Phil said it was 5+ years out. And that kind of aligns with what most feel is going to be the beginning of the next generation of consoles, which is holiday 2028. Some early reports are saying 2027. I don't think they're going to be able to do that. I think it's got to be 2028 because we had that supply chain shortage at the beginning because of the chip shortage during COVID. I think they're going to have to extend it a little bit. There's people right now that are just getting their hands on these things, right? And it wasn't out of a need or out of a lack of desire. It was just out of the supply chain issues. So I think extending that to 2028 makes the most sense. Most industry and analysts seem to agree with that. So I think, and I've had this discussion with some people as well on the internet, individuals in the industry that I'm not going to name anybody, but these are people that I'm not going to say are privy to private information. They don't have private information, not Microsoft people or Bethesda people or anything like that, but they're familiar with how these businesses do operate. They are within that kind of scope of things. And we were discussing this, and we think it's very likely that Bethesda gets additional support from Microsoft to ensure that this Elder Scrolls 6 title is a day one launch game on the Xbox Series, whatever the heck they're going to call it. Because, well, they did what? Xbox, then Xbox 360, then Xbox One, then Xbox Series S and X. So the next one's going to be Xbox Alley-oop or something. I don't know. But anyways, I'm not privy to any of that information. Again, this is just a hypothetical, but it makes sense. Everything lines up. Let's throw everything we can at the Starfield, or at ES6, because that would be a huge launch for them. And I know they do not want to repeat, right? So if there's a possibility to make that line up, let's make it line up, because they do not want a repeat of this generation's launch. Because, let's face it, there's nothing, right? The Series S and X launched with no exclusive, a delayed Halo and all that ruckus, really, over a couple of years. And it took a while for them to find their stride. I think we're seeing the stride now. But the one thing I can't guarantee is there's absolutely no desire from anyone at Xbox to repeat that experience. And I think they need to hit the next generation. And I know it's silly we're talking about this 5 years out, but they're planning it right now. So let's hit it full speed. So, and they could have thrown a lot more resources at things. And I think they're maybe learning that lesson now, that obviously 343 needed additional support. I think, Bethesda wasn't around for that launch, but I think there could have been a little bit more at the beginning of there. Playground came in clutch with Forza Horizon 5. 343 should have came in with Halo Infinite for launch. Maybe Certain Affinity could have had something, or, there's something they could have had, I think, that would have been better than what they got. It's one of those things, but it's done. It's history. Let's focus on this next one. Let's make sure we're launching the Xbox, whatever it is, the 2028 Xbox, with a Halo game, with Elder Scrolls 6, with a Forza game. Let's hit with the big three, and let's see how we can go from there. Pardon me. Phil Spencer also committed, again, to making Call of Duty available to PlayStation after this merger completes. He has said this pretty much everywhere he can get his face in front of a camera, or in a magazine, or on papers. He's tweeted it, whatever. He probably hired a skywriter or two as well. He's just said Call of Duty's coming to PlayStation. He's signed contracts to bring it to everywhere else, or agreements. And he's tried to make that agreement with Sony, and Sony just won't return mail. But during the second day of the FTC trial, he said that that losing Call of Duty on its largest console platform, which is PlayStation, would not be economically viable. We all agree. Everybody else agrees with that. He goes on to say that pulling Call of Duty from PlayStation, in his view, would, and I'm quoting him here, would create irreparable harm to Xbox's brand because of gamer outrage. The judge asked him to testify under oath that future versions of Call of Duty will be made available to PlayStation. And he said, absolutely, raised his hand. And then they did that. He testified under oath. He repeated after me, did the whole thing. That's better than any contract that you could ever get, because if you reneges on that, Phil's committing perjury. And then he goes to jail. And that makes him a criminal. So I think that pretty much settles the debate about that. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about this trial is how the trial's going. and I don't want to go into boring details about this too much. So, it is a law case. There's some exciting aspects about it. It definitely, this antitrust or anti-competition aspect of it is an interesting aspect because I don't believe the FTC has a case. I think the FTC is doing activism-based rulings here. We've had 2.5 days of court. The first day was basically like the first half day. I think they started at 2 in California. Was basically just kind of establishing procedure and how things are going to work. Confidentiality over documents and asserting that kind of stuff and things like that. Thursday, the trial opened up. We had testimony from Bethesda executives, Pete Hines, as well as Xbox's Matt Booty and Sarah Bond. I've mentioned all that. Today, Friday, we saw Phil Spencer on the second day, and pretty much all the rest of it was behind closed doors. There was videotape testimony from Jim Ryan, who's PlayStation boss, and the CFO, the chief financial officer of Microsoft, was up there. And that was all confidential nature, like specific financial and business related proprietary information. And they discussed that not only about Xbox, but also about PlayStation and other competitors. What's incredibly important here for the Federal Trade Commission to establish in this to stop this merger, they need to prove that the merger is harmful to the console gaming market and it's harmful to the cloud gaming market. I don't necessarily think they need to prove both of those, but it would definitely help their case if they could prove both of those. And there's a reason why I don't think they need to prove both of those. Coming down I'll talk about that in a sec. But they also need to establish what those markets are and how they could be affected, because you have to define those markets. As I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, like Phil testified under oath at the request of the judge that he would make future versions of Call of Duty available to Sony. That doesn't necessarily mean that Sony needs to put them on their system. Like they could be like, no, we're going to give away the cash cow. But that deal or that testimony basically removes the biggest part of the FTC's console gaming theory of harm. Like that argument is done. And honestly, that's the only part of it where I think the FTC had any chance. The lawyers went on to question about Diablo, which he said, yeah, sure, right? Let's put it on PlayStation. And then about whether PlayStation charges platforms or what happens when PlayStation changes platforms, all sorts of stuff like that. And it was just all hypotheticals and they started kind of going all over the place. But because most of that is theoretical, the judge kind of just put a stop on it and kind of said, hey, get off this. I get the point. I don't need that information. Let's move on. And then the FTC tried switching gears and talk about the Nintendo Switch and discussed, whether Phil Spencer considers that a 9th generation console or an 8th generation console, which I think is stupid. I don't believe in console generations per se. But excluding the Switch from the generation or from their market would make Xbox's slice of the pie bigger on their little chart. So the FTC wants to look at it that way. But I don't think you can. The way I see it, and I hope other people kind of look at it this way, because I think it's the most logical way. I go into Best Buy or Walmart or whatever as a consumer, and I go to their gaming section, however ridiculously small it is now. And there's 3 things on the shelf. There's a PlayStation, there's an Xbox, and there's a Switch. That is your gaming market. There isn't a different gaming market than, like, you have those 3, and then you have mobile, and then you have, you got your cloud devices, but that's not really a separate market. Those are just different ways to interact with the same things. And then you have PC, right? And PC is really technically the high-end market, because in order to be able to do more than what the consoles are offering, you need a higher-end PC. So that kind of makes them part of the Nintendo market of the video game market as far as I'm concerned. The Switch is on the shelf. That's the gaming market, whether it's an 8th gen or 9th gen. Like, again, I don't believe in generations. Obviously, the Switch has got dated hardware. It came out in 2017, and it's mobile-based hardware. You're talking systems on a chip and things like that. And then it's 2017. Nintendo should have had a new one 2 years ago, but they didn't. Probably because they didn't have chips because of a shortage, and they had to change gears because we did have rumors going about that happening a couple of years ago. apparently there was dev kits, apparently all that. And I think what happened is they had some stuff lined up, but not enough stuff lined up. And because of the chip shortage, they couldn't complete the deal. And that's why we got the OLED model. Because they had, well, shit, we got 100 million of these screens coming. We better do something with them. So they started slapping them on the OLED, and that's it, right? So I think Phil navigated that line of questioning very well. He didn't go down those rabbit holes. He said, like, the Switch has lower performing hardware, sure, but a high-end PC has high performing hardware. We just make the game for it. And then he also said that, like, when he gets his reports every day, he's getting the performance of games and sales and all that stuff on these reports. All three consoles are on there: the Switch, the Xbox, and the PlayStation. And he considers the Switch part of the console space, although it's running on this older generation hardware, which, as I said, that's not even arguable. But it's also not even a point, really. You look at the vast differences in between hardware that we used to have back in, pre-Xbox days, back with the PlayStation 2 and the N64 and, well, not PlayStation 2, sorry, the PlayStation 1, the N64, right? We had all these different things. You had a 32-bit system versus a 64-bit system, right? And uneducated people will go, that 64-bit system is way more powerful than a 32-bit system. Well, to a degree, right? But how it's processed that data is a lot different, and there was a lot more efficiencies there. So, they would run a little bit better once they get loaded, right? And things like that. So, disparity in between platform performance, I don't think is indicative of it being a separate market, right? You had PlayStation guys, you had N64 guys, you had Sega Saturn weirdos. Like, you had everything kind of going on at the same time. So really, the only angle that the FTC could have used to shut to do this has been shut down, right? The only angle that they could have used on the console market theory of harm got shut down because there's no theory of harm. We're not changing our business. We're just going to be like, hey, we own Activision now, but Activision's still going to do what Activision does and release games where Activision wants to release games. And it appears that's kind of how Bethesda's operating. It's Bethesda's choices that they're releasing games just on the Xbox, right? Obviously, that's number one. And then number two would be the PlayStation, right? So I think it's been Bethesda's and ZeniMax's choice up till now. And it's going to continue that way going forward. And I think Activision is very much going to be looked at the same way. The only other theory of harm is the cloud gaming market, which the FTC, they have a huge uphill battle here because they have to prove that cloud gaming is indeed a separate market from standard gaming. And as we've talked about here on the show before, and pretty much everybody in the industry is going to kind of attest to this, even cloud gaming giant NVIDIA has said this, like, they're massive. They're the kings of this castle with their GeForce Now technology. The market is still very niche and small. It relies on infrastructure that isn't entirely ready yet, as I discussed. We don't have access to high-speed internet everywhere that can support that. And it's not exactly taken off in revenues or anything like that. Like, it's a niche thing. And Xbox showed that most of its cloud gaming usage comes from players who play a game from the cloud while they wait for the game to download. So they'll be like, oh, okay, I just bought whatever game, or I do it even on Game Pass, right? I'll be like, oh, I want to try what I just recently do that with. I'm trying to think now. I just did it with something. Gosh, I can't remember now. But I started downloading it, but then I was like, well, that's going to take like an hour or something to download. I just want to boot it up and see if it's something I'm going to play, get into it for a minute, because I only had half an hour or something before I needed to kind of hit the sack. So I will play it while it's downloading and just be like, oh, okay, yeah, I get the vibe of it. That's cool. And then I'll go to bed, and in the morning I'll play it because it's downloaded. And that's apparently how most people do this. The other thing I kind of assign the xCloud service for is like, is this something I'm really interested in? Is this worth my download time? Right. So if I'll boot it up on xCloud, play 20 minutes of it and go, yeah, it was a cool game loop. That's something I like. So I'm going to, download it. It's worth the time expense, not the physical expense, but the time expense. And I just want to see if things are my jam, and that's kind of worth it. right? It's not like I can go to Blockbuster and rent it, right? So, and that's where I see cloud gaming being a good thing, or a usable experience, is that layer in between purchasable retail and like a rental service. Like I would pay $4 to rent, fill in the game, right? Final Fantasy 16 for the weekend and see if it's my thing. I would do that, right? And I think there's a lot of gamers out there, especially my generation, who, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but we have more expendable income than your average 15-year-old. So I think it makes sense to kind of market things that way for it. And I think that's a good kind of area for the service to exist in. But again, that is a layer in the ways you purchase games tree. It's not a separate market. It's not a separate thing, right? You could rent a movie or buy a movie before. You could go to Blockbuster to do both. So I don't see how, that translates from movies to here. It's not like, Apple Music or Spotify is a separate thing from a record store, Tower Records, or I'm trying to think of the name of a record store that's international, but HMV or something like that. HMV went out of business. Oh man, am I dating myself? But it's not like music distribution is a separate market. It's just a different way to consume the goods, right? I don't buy records on or music on album format anymore because I have Apple Music and I have Spotify, so I have access to them in multiple ways. Amazon Music is another platform that I use quite often because it comes with Prime, right? It doesn't mean that I am a avid Amazon Prime Amazon Music user. It just means that I utilize the service because it's available to me. And I think that is what is being done here with Xbox xCloud is it's being utilized because it's available, but I don't think anybody's going to go out of their way to subscribe to it in a separate business. And that's really where this hurts. The market isn't really viable as a standalone market. It's viable as a integrated layer within other markets and other distributions methods within the gaming market. The FTC brought in the former executive of Stadia, as Stadia closed up, to take the stand, and he testified that they directly competed against Xbox and PlayStation. That was their thing. They were like, okay, you can come to Xbox or PlayStation, but if you come to us, here's some money, and things like that. So that eliminates the cloud gaming theory of harm, I think, by indicating that the market of cloud gaming is the same market as console gaming. I think that pretty much closed it. And that hurts the FTC's case here, but it also hurts the CMA's case over in the UK. And I think that needs to be kind of thought about, because I think the CMA is going to have to change gears on their decision. I don't think it matters because of what's happening here, because the FTC, they needed to come out big. They needed Sammy Sosa and Barry Bonds to come out and hit homers, and they didn't. And now they have basically Tuesday and Wednesday to make their case. Part of Thursday is going to basically be like, this is how the law backs up our case. And they have that little period of time to fend off whatever the Microsoft defense is going to be, which I would bet good money it's going to be well prepared. And whatever avenue the FTC comes in and says, this is what we're saying is this, I think Microsoft's going to have a trump card to lay down on that. I'm pretty sure that this preventative injunction is going to be denied. It's dead in the water. And the judge, I think, has to make a decision within 5 days to the close of the case, if I'm not mistaken. And then I think the deal closes. I'm pretty sure the deal's just going to close as soon as she makes her decision. Judge Corley is very fair, and very by the book. I was reading up a lot about her. She was confirmed by an almost equal amount of Democrats and Republicans, which very seldom happens. That's a completely kind of bipartisan effort to confirm a judge anymore. And she was confirmed by both. I was going through appeals that have been filed off of cases that she decided on, and she's not, her decision's always stood up. No appeal has gone through that's been like, oh yeah, she did something wrong here on a procedural level. So I think I think her decisions are solid. She's fair and honest, and I think it's obviously obviously I'm rooting for Microsoft in this aspect for a multitude of reasons, but I think it mainly is because I'm against activist governments that are trying to do things that are outside of their bounds or outside of their scope. And that's what the FTC is trying to do. It's a government body trying to trying to govern itself without the legislation to back itself up in those decisions. If they want to break up big tech, they need to lobby to get legislation passed in order to do that, and to give them the power to do that. This isn't the way to do it. Anyways, it's kind of time to move on from that. I'm not going to dwell on that too much anymore. I think the next discussion about that will be the resolution, and I'll kind of move on from there unless anything really cool pops up as far, like that Starfield exclusive discussion and things like that could be interesting if there's more stuff like that that comes out as a result. Anyways, it's time to move on from that mess into another. Final Fantasy XVI came out this week too, and this is according to morons on the internet again, bad reviews. The game is actually sitting at an 88 on Metacritic, which is like phenomenally good. So I'm not sure what they're really talking about here, but it's getting review bombed on the user score. So I think it's sitting at like a 6.5 right now. I think most of this stems from two things. There's probably a bunch of Xbox fanboys that are talking shit about it. And Final Fantasy fans some of them are angry about the series departing from its usual tropes and game mechanics and going into this other avenue. I still don't think it's the solution. Like, if the game isn't your jam, just play a different game. Right? That's, if you don't like where Final Fantasy's going, play Dragon Quest. It's, or something like that. Right? I played the demo a fair bit, and there was a demo released for it on the PS5, and the game performed well. It had a fun loop. I didn't have any stutters or anything like that. I thought it was pretty good. I didn't have a single clue about what was happening. The story didn't grab me at all, and that could be my fault because, I say it's my fault more than the game's, because sometimes these plots take a little bit of time to sink into my thick skull, and it'll be one of those things like, oh, I get it now, a little bit later. But I could be wrong there. I think it looks great. It sounds great. It feels great. So I don't really buy into any of this noise about it. If you look at it objectively as a fan of video games, I think it's a good video game. I think it's a great video game. And I think that there's times, like most games around the launch window, where things are going to be a little janky. And honestly, that probably will get patched out if it hasn't already. I heard people have experienced some jank. I didn't experience any jank, or at least noticeable jank. I didn't notice any frames dropping or anything like that. I didn't notice it being kind of a clusterfuck or anything. So I think it's pretty good. And really, there's been much worse releases very recently. Redfall. So it's kind of forgivable that it has a couple of those things going on. I've read from people that I trust, not to be into this fanboy aspect of things, that the story is weak. So, and I think Jason Schreier touched on that, saying, the story is pretty weak. Gene Park, who did a review for the Washington Post, he's their video games writer over there. He said it's a must-play game. He did say the story isn't as good as some of the other Final Fantasy games, but he said it is a must-play game, and he gave it a top score. So, those are the people that I kind of look at trusting for these discussions and these types of games. And when it comes to reviewing a game, I don't think you follow one person for a game, right? I think you follow a selection of people. You go get a bunch of people that talk about games, and maybe you find you find guys and gals doing this, that their discussion about a game. So you find a game that you agree with them on. You go, yeah, that was a great game, and you find out why they liked it. And if it's the same reasons that you liked it, then that's good. So then you're like, okay, for these types of games, these people like this kind of stuff. So that's what they're going to be looking for. So I listen to what they're talking about. You got to look past the score and get into the story and read the article about why these people like these games or don't like these games. And, I believe Gene Park would give it a bad review if he felt it was a bad game, and he didn't. So there you go. And I believe Jason Schreier when he says that it has a weak story, but the game is fun. And I believe that because that's what my experience was with it as well, right? I don't want to say the story was weak. I didn't quite understand what was happening. Again, I'm a little slow when it comes to stuff like that sometimes. At any rate, this thing is reviewed well by the critics. It's going to be an amazing seller. It's going to be in contention for Game of the Year. So I think that's good news for like kind of true fans of the series. And this has been a phenomenal year for those high 80s, mid 90s games, you know, with Tears of the Kingdom and Hi-Fi Rush and now this. And we got so much to look forward to. We got Starfield coming and things like that. So, and Forza and some more stuff that I'm going to talk about soon, that I think it's probably going to go down as one of the best years in gaming. And I think that's because COVID created a logjam, like a logjam of development, right? Everything kind of had to stop during COVID, and some companies were getting a little further ahead than other companies were just based off of how they were set up. And now all that's ironed out one way or the other, and games are coming out, right? The logjam's been cleared. And we're getting logs that were shoved in last. We're getting logs that shoved in first. We were getting logs shoved in the middle, coming out all at the same time. And what a cool time, right? Like this year's been so good for that, and I think it's going to continue for the next couple of years, I think. Anyways, Nintendo had a direct this week. The gift that is not E3 keeps on giving, with Nintendo showing off some cool new stuff at their show. We got to look at a Super Mario RPG, a remake. The complete remake. This beloved SNES game. I believe Squaresoft had a hand with it back in the day, and it's coming to Switch this fall as a complete and total remake. It looks amazing. We also got a sneak peek at a new game that is Peach centric that's going to be coming next year, and I think that's cool that we get that. I like to explore all these other characters a bit more. We saw Detective Pikachu 2, right? Which I think is, I forgot about Detective Pikachu 1, so I might have to start doing that. We saw some add-ons for Scarlet and Violet, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet as well, new Splatoon stuff. They dove into Pikmin 4 a little bit and showed how that works. It's a Pikmin game. If you haven't played a Pikmin game, Pikmin 1 and 2 are now available on the eShop. You don't need to play them to get Pikmin 4. But honestly, Pikmin 3 Deluxe on the Switch eShop is the way to play Pikmin. That's the way to experience it right off the hop. Anyways, and they also showed off some Mario Kart 8 Deluxe stuff, including some new characters and a new course of the Way 5 DLC. Can't remember what it's called. Squeaky Clean something or other, I think. It's looks like it takes place in a bathroom. You know, like a miniature scale model like they do in like the kids' playrooms and stuff like that. So it's kind of neat. But the big thing was closing out the direct was the surprise I think I've been waiting for. I think a lot of other people have been waiting for. Super Mario Brothers Wonder was revealed there, and it's coming this fall. It's a new Mario game. It's all 2D side-scrolling platformer glory. Like it's what I love about Mario games. It has a new Wonder Star thing that you collect, and when you get it, strange things happen, like pipes start moving around like worms, and clouds move, and you can telescope like Inspector Gadget or whatever. It looks so much fun, and I like I said with Sonic the other week, this is very much my flavor of game, so I'm stoked. I love 2D side scrollers, and this is like the 2.5D, like it's 3D models on a 2D plane. They showed that you can play as the main characters of Mario, Luigi, Toad, and Peach, but now finally you can play as Daisy, and that should be everybody's favorite because Daisy rules. Then in the final shot, Mario collects one of these Wonder Thingers, and he turns into an elephant. So who knows what's up with that? I'm excited to see what Elephant Mario can do and why he would be useful in the game and the mechanic for it. You know, it's cool. Nintendo's showing off some really cool stuff that came out with a surprise direct. Like we knew there was going to be something coming, but we didn't know it was going to be like this. So it's pretty cool. And anyways, that does it for a lengthy news discussion. I apologize if I bored your face off there. That was just over an hour of news. But there was a lot happening, and there was some things that deserved like a little bit of a deeper dive into it. As I say every week at the beginning of this podcast is about gaming from an adult point of view, and that includes parenthood. And I had an interesting conversation this week with some people about how we gauge what's appropriate for our kids to play. And this stemmed from a question Tom Henderson posed. Tom Henderson over at Insider Gaming posted on social, and that it got shared around on Reddit and Twitter and other places. And we had some good discussions about how that works. And I kind of wanted to talk about that here because that's something relevant as a parent and how we decide what's appropriate for our kids. So I think it's worth having. Excuse me. So kind of for context, my kids are 5 and 8, and they do not play near as much as I do, but they do enjoy it. They have an Xbox, like an Xbox One. They can play on our Series S or X as well. They have a Switch. They use my PS5. And then they also have tablets. And tablets is where they do the most of their stuff. It's easy. They can move it around from room to room. They bring it on the cars, and they each get one. So it's a little bit more personalized for them that way as well. But the tablets have locked down like Fort Knox. They got to go through either myself or Amanda for approval for pretty much everything. I've pre-approved some content by category. There's also a selection of curated educational content, which is, teacher-approved education-based learning games. I've allowed that by default. And otherwise, we're basically the gatekeepers of this whole thing. Every time they ask to install a game, I get a notification on the Google Family Link app, which kind of looks like it's not going to show up very good, but it kind of looks like that. So they can't just go around installing stuff. If they are asking for something, I will typically base it off the title. See if I'm going to immediately approve it or look into it. And, if the title says Paw Patrol coloring, okay. But if the title's something else, it'll be, something I got to look into or learn about anyways. Wallet-wise, it's connected to my wallet on my Google account, but I have to release funds for them to use the family app. So I have to be like, okay, here's $5 or whatever it is. Or I can make the purchase myself and then assign permissions that they can play it. YouTube is on it as well. And I think that's one of the bigger roadblocks for parents is YouTube. As you can see, you can watch anything on YouTube. They let me on it. So, the sky's the limit there. Obviously, they do censor material. There is no nudity and things like that. And in certain contexts, allowed no explicit stuff. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily all safe for children. Just like, cable TV isn't necessarily safe for children. So I have preset the content there as well. It's basically the same as the other stuff. I allow educational content only, and I pre-approve some other creators, Beanie Boo creators and a couple other things like that they really like. But other than that, I got to assign permissions. So, if one of them asks me if they can watch something, I look into it. Right. And I base it off of what the content is or why it may be rated a little higher because it's locked by age. A lot of the stuff that it feeds them in the algorithm is locked by age. And when you say content is for children on YouTube, it gets reviewed by a human, and then it gets posted. So there's a good layer of protection there. Yeah, sometimes it's mindless garbage. Kid playing on the floor with Beanie Babies, and you've got a room full of Beanie Babies you could be playing on the floor with, but. I get it. Sometimes mindless garbage is what you need, and I'm not totally against that. So, and to see them, they'll watch something that one of these creators does with their toys or what have you, and then they'll reenact some of that stuff. And that's where I do have some hesitation because I don't want them reenacting, obviously, like violent things or things that could get them hurt or get them in trouble with, a teacher or something as well. At least before I get the opportunity to tame that down. And, you got to buffer it, but it also helps promote their imagination. There's other avenues of play that they haven't experienced yet or other scenarios they haven't experienced yet. And that's kind of something fun. So, there's that. I don't really let them watch people stream games at all. At least not yet. The pre-recorded stuff probably not going to happen anytime soon. Live stuff definitely not yet, because language in that content is really hard to control. It may be a suitable game they're playing, but somebody could be talking about something inappropriate and things like that. And they're too young for that, I think, still in my opinion. But I'm basing this off of their kind of the maturity, and I'm kind of setting the stage here for the other side of this whole thing, which is consoles, which they do have parental controls. Xbox is a really good parental control system. I like PlayStation's as well. The Switch is bad. It's kind of rating locked, which is weird. I like to be able to select specific things. But anyways, my library, at least on as far as the Switch and the Xbox is concerned, because they have their own consoles, my library is essentially their library. I do lock certain games for their account. Obviously, I don't want my kids jumping into Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto or whatever without me present, at the very least. But they can play like, Forza or Zelda or what, Mario and things like that. There's scenarios and situations in games, even like Zelda, that could be scarier or out of context for them and they might not understand it. But for the most part, I think they're safe games for them to play. And I understand my kid or at least my 8-year-old has the maturity level to wrap around a lot of that stuff and differentiating between reality there. The 5-year-old's getting there much quicker because they have an 8-year-old sibling to look up to. And how I reached the conclusion of what I think they're allowed to, what content they're allowed to consume is basically how they interact with other content that they consume. Whether it's, content that I am consuming and they're witnessing or my wife or what have you, and how they talk about certain things as well. So it's, you got to be a parent and do those things and read into the situation a little bit. And I'm not doing this to speak down or anything like that. I'm just kind of providing context for how I reach those decisions. I don't pay much attention to ratings too much. And that's because like a game could get a T or an M rating because of a completely dumb thing, at least in my opinion. It could be because someone says the F-bomb in a song that's in the game, and they're like, oh, mature lyrics, rated M. Or an NPC is smoking a cigarette somewhere in the game, and they're like, rated M, tobacco use. It could also be like good reasons, Scorpion ripping out somebody's spine in Mortal Kombat, good reason. Ass, blood, and guts all over the place, good reason to give it a high rating. But I use my judgment when it comes to that. And if the entire reason the game has a high rating is because there's music in the game that has a suggestive theme or a mature lyric, my kids are fine to play it. You can mute the music in the menu if you want. That's one way to mitigate that. Or I've done things like, I know that song, it's not that bad, or I listen to the song if I don't know it. And then if I'm kind of figure it out based off of that, right? If it's the odd swear word, I'm not particular about that, but basically if it meets the grade for radio play, I'm thinking it's okay for my kids to listen to. If it's vulgar, I'll just mute the music and hand them the controller and away they go. And that translates over to TV, really. Like if I was watching a TV show or a movie and they came in, right? Do you hit the pause button, right? That's the big question. Oh, do I stop this because my kid just came in? My kid was in bed. We were watching grown-up movies, and my kid came out. Well, if it's Bruce Willis about to shout, yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker, I'm not jumping on the pause button because I don't think that's really that bad of a thing, right? I can put swear words into context for my kids. I can tell them, those are bad words. Those are grown-up words. We don't use those words. But he was celebrating a thing or doing a thing. So you can put them in the context a little bit with them. And you can, but if you're going to see some dude get melted or it's going to be a raunchy scene, you're going to give it a pause, right? So you kind of, if you don't know what's going to happen, obviously you want to give it a pause, but if it's something you're familiar with, right? And I kind of look at that as what content I'm willing to expose them to in video games, right? If like the guy that's about to get dismembered is the Black Knight from the Holy Grail, who cares? That's comedy. There's a context to it. And that's actually an opportunity to talk to them about what they're about to see or what they did just see and explain it to them, as long as it's not really going to induce nightmares or raise questions about other things that are, you get out of hand on the conversation, I think it's a valuable experience points for the kids down the road. And it's worth, being the grown up and talking to them about those things. I've let them run the horse around in Red Dead Redemption. My oldest is quite the drifter in Forza Horizon, actually. They've both taken turns shooting trees in Far Cry, right? It's not necessarily about the writing on the box, but what they're doing in it, right? And, running the horse around in Red Dead Redemption, there's a chance you're going to have one of those dynamic experiences where, a bear comes and attacks you or something like that. And it is what it is, but that's also nature. So you're able to explain that, or I feel I'm able to explain that adequately. And, if it scares them, you just, okay, stop. You don't have to play it. Like, we're not forcing them. But I'm not about to, here's a controller, go run around in Grand Theft Auto, because there's too much that could happen and something like that. And, honestly, I don't think I would exclude them from certain portions of the game, but I don't think I would include them in others. Like, hey, you want to ride a bicycle down a hill really quick? Give them the bicycle, put them at the top of the mountain, send them down the hill. They might have fun doing that, right? And that'd be it, right? So it's all about what experience you're willing to let them have and what experiences they should be experiencing as well. Every gaming parent's going to have their own thoughts about this and kind of what's right, what's wrong. And I'm sure they stem from, personal experiences, but there's also input from other people, family members, friends, weird dudes on the internet. And then there's also that fear of balancing being a good parent and being a fun one. And I think it's very possible to be both. These things, my mom never shied away from these kind of things. When I was younger, granted, the most gory experience that we had was like Mortal Kombat 2. And I was playing it on the Super Nintendo, so it wasn't like it was crazy bad for me. Or did I have it on Sega? I think I had it on Sega Genesis instead. I did ultimately wind up getting it on a computer, and I thought that was horribly cool, but whatever. You don't have... My mom never censored me from that content because we didn't really have that extreme content in there. And then by the time things like Grand Theft Auto were coming out, I was an adult and I was able to make my own decisions on what I was going to consume. But when it came to like movies, there were certain things that she was just like, this is a little too much for you, but this might be okay for you, and things like that. So, not Terminator 2, but maybe we'll let you watch, Jurassic Park. And then, by the time that came around, I was actually able to watch Terminator 2. And then, you get a little bit more as you go, right? It's about consuming the content and understanding what's in it and understanding the maturity of your child. So I think there's all sorts of reasons that you would have to censor content from your kids, good ones and wise ones as well. And there's societal and religious reasons and all sorts of things that you take into consideration as a parent. And I want to hear your thoughts and ideas on that. So, reach out, put them in the comments, hit us up on Twitter. Let us know what you think about how you curtail your content for your children. Just last little bit here. I did want to talk about what games I've been playing, because we're a gaming podcast. There's some fun stuff there. But it's been a bit of a week. I've had lots going on this week. It's been a busy week back and forth at the hospital, getting my treatments and going for appointments and stuff. So it's been a bit busier than normal, and there's been stuff around the home, obviously, that I'm trying to catch up on, and things take a little bit longer to do when you're ill. So I'm adjusting for that. So I didn't really get as much playtime as I wanted, but I've kicked the living snot out of a bunch of Yakuza Like a Dragon and a bunch of Forza Horizon 5. So I've managed to get a few more chapters in of Yakuza done. The game's still wildly entertaining. I think I'm probably going to wrap it up early next week sometime. So I should be back to Zelda again to finish up Tears of the Kingdom, and then whatever I'm going to play next to get me to Starfield. Forza keeps on delivering, as it always does, these amazing racing experiences, and coupled with these rewarding challenges. I'm enjoying doing the seasons and working through the various seasonal objectives every week, as well as tidying up all those incomplete things that are on the map. The 2-star drift zone here, the 1-star jump that you just drove over by accident, things like that. They also dropped new content this week, so I'm going to have to dive into that and see what that is. But here we are a couple years later, they're still dropping new stuff. So I think it's pretty cool. I'm thinking about doing some streaming along with this program. I'm not sure what that'll look like, but soon I'll be doing something with that. I think I'm not sure if it's going to be on YouTube or Twitch or Kick, or maybe I'll do a combination. We'll see. I've got to weigh the pros and cons of all that and see what it's worth to do, like to set up all the accounts and where the people are to watch those platforms. But anyways, when it's live, I'll share the details everywhere, including here, and we'll see what's what then. I also got a partnership for the show, which is pretty exciting. That'll be debuting soon as I get the welcome package in the mail, so I can promote that. And that should be next week as well. Very excited for that to join us up here. Alrighty, that just about does it for this week. You can find more from us on Twitter by following Amarren Studios or on YouTube. Our link is in the audio description of the show. If you do watch us on YouTube and want to bring us with you on the go, you can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, anywhere you find your pods. I have been Warren, and you have been the best audience in gaming. Thank you for joining us. See you next time. Goodbye. I just wanted to apologize for cutting out late there. I really had to use the facilities. I don't get much notice about that anymore. So again, I want to apologize for being a little quick on the goodbye message there. I appreciate every single one of you for listening to the show. Thank you for being the best audience in gaming. See you next week. I hope you all enjoy the beautiful weather ahead of us. It's finally summer. Thank you and have a great day.